No, this is fine. Yeah, this actually worked good for last week, so we'll just do this one. Is this unidirectional or is it multidirectional? Can you hear me over here? Can you hear me this way? Can you hear me? You hear me this way? It's multidirectional. Excellent. That's what I like to see. I'm a musician. Yeah, I'm a musician. So I record music. So yeah. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for coming. Today we have something great. We're going to do polytheism today. So that I know it sounds kind of strange, but I have some great things to go over. But before we do that, let's pray. Father, thank you for this. I commit this to you. Please help us to do it your way, because it's all about you. It's not about us. And I just commit this to you in Jesus' name. So the key is with polytheism, it is not about us. Polytheism is all about us, but God is about what he wants. The things that God does is very specific. The things that God says is very specific. What he tells you is very specific. Okay? But polytheism and all the things about all the gods and everything is truly about whatever man can bring up in his mind. So we will have a little bit of homework later, but I'll go over that here in a little bit. So let's begin with polytheism. All right, corruption. So in the early church, they used the word corruption a lot. I mean, Athanasius, all these guys, they really used corruption. And corruption, in my opinion, is probably the best way to describe sin. Because corruption is, and now we're not talking the corruption about all of those wonderful political people that we see all this stuff. That's not that kind of corruption. But corruption of decay from inside. So a good word would putrefaction. So putrefaction, the thing about it is, even if a little bit of it starts. So think about sin. A little bit comes on a tomato, let's say. And it starts spreading and spreading and spreading, and then it gets to the whole entire thing. That's what sin is. And I like the word corruption for that reason, because basically it just corrupts the whole entire being. Now, you can cut out part of it. Now, and I really believe that God in the Bible is really this was kind of the idea, because God says, we can trim off the branches or trim off this or trim off that. Because you can do that with putrefaction. Get rid of the junk to keep the good stuff. But we're going to see that in polytheism, it started something very small, but it grew into this major conglomerate that really took over everything. Corruption slowly took our eyes and minds off God and placed them on ourselves. We become gods. That's a key point. Even though they do all these other gods, they looked at all these other gods, the key is it's all about humans. Whatever we think, whatever we come up with, see, the idea of the first and second commandment is no other gods before me and don't make an image. Because every single image we make, guess what? It's about a created thing. Your homework this week actually has that specifically in it. So the thing is, we become gods. And look at today, even evolution and all this other, oh, it's the greatness of humans, the humans. No, it's not. We are not that great as we think we are. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, it's interesting. Now, think about it. There is only one God, but why did God say no other gods? Because the people at the time believed in tons of gods, just like we do in a sense. Sports figures, movie stars, money, our job, whatever it is. Plenty of gods. Then you said, do not make yourself an image. The first two are what we're going to be dealing with today. The third one, do not misuse the name of the Lord, will be what we're going to talk about next week in our final week of polytheism. Because that basically means invoking God's name for your own benefit. Not a good thing to do. So much of today's lecture is going to be based upon this book. Now, I've been spending the last 3 or 4 years studying polytheism, but I found that this book is amazing. If you want to understand the way people thought back then, this is the great book, because that's what we're going to go through. Also, on the opposite side of things, if you want to understand how God describes himself in the Bible, in the Old Testament, everything he says about himself is all because to refute polytheism, because that was the major thing they did. So, if you want to understand the Old Testament at all, you got to understand polytheism. I would say if most, if not all, the books of the Old Testament have something to do with polytheism in it. And let's see why. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. That's polytheism. Ruth was, anybody remember where Ruth was from? Moab. So which means she probably worshipped Chemosh, the Moabite god. So now by her saying is she is going to take on this god instead of her God. She's basically, which is quite the big thing, because you don't just let go of your God because you'll find out that people don't want to make the gods mad. But that was a pretty awesome thing that she did. Now let's take Ezra. Now we just went from Ruth was right after the Judges. Now we're right after coming back from the exile. Ezra. They came to Zerubbabel, and the heads of the family said, "Let's help build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Sheridan, king of Assyria." We will go more into this later when we get into the historical and the prophecies a little bit later, because this actually did happen. So when Assyria took away all the Israelites, they had to send some back to teach them how to do this. Now, just so you know, these people that are talking here are the Samaritans. Think of John chapter 4 when he meets the Samaritan lady. Well, you said we need to worship here, but we said we're going to worship over here. The idea is we're doing it our way, but you said you have to do it this way. Again, if you guys did the homework for the last couple weeks, you're going to find that one of the things I put in there was we have to do it God's way. We can't make the decision to do whatever we want to do. We have to do it his way, because he's the one who chose it. We can't just go to any, well, you just come to God any way you want, he'll just accept you. No, that's not what the Bible says. We got to do it his way. And the thing is, what this whole thing right there is about is doing it their way, which were the Samaritans. That's why there was a big issue with that. Anyway. All right. Understanding, this is from me. Science, Hollywood, and anthropomorphism. Whew. Weird stuff. Science, Hollywood, anthropomorphism. This is really, in my opinion, one of the best ways to describe polytheism. Science. Now, back in the day, they did not go over the laws of gravity. They did not go over thermodynamics. They did not go over calculus. They didn't do any of that. Why? Because in a sense, it was much easier to say a god did it and attribute it to a god. Or the god of lightning, the god of the sea, the God of the middle of the sea, the God of under the sea, the God of this, the God of that. It was much easier to do that because why go and try to figure out how everything works when you can just attribute it to a God? Oh yeah, the God did it. So that was a big thing what they did in polytheism. Hollywood, they would come up with elaborate stories. Now, key with this is whatever our brains can think of and make is akin to something that is created. We created everything. We created in our minds this and that. The reason why God doesn't want us to do an image is because anything we think is created. And there is no image that could even start to say that. So in Hollywood, they would come up with elaborate stories. If you ever read the Gilgamesh epic, or you read some of the Mari tales, or some of these other things that come up, you'll find that it's the people's imagination goes nuts about what the gods do. But wait a minute, how would they know any of that stuff? Well, they wouldn't. But hey, it's all about us. Whatever our imagination can come to. That's where this stuff kind of gets really crazy. Anthropomorphism. What I said earlier, it's all about us. This is it. Anthropomorphism is putting everything, attributes of human to everything. Now think about it. Think about Hollywood. Have you ever noticed that every one of our aliens that we can see and do or think whatever in Hollywood, they're all standing straight up like this? And they all have kind of arms. Even if they have weird things coming off them, they're still all standing up. That's anthropomorphism. Making everything a human quality. That is a big problem. Because remember what? You should not make yourself an image or form of anything. Anthropomorphism is making a human or they may put a bird head on it. They may put whatever on it. But the thing is, it's all a created idea. Created. And only God is the creator. So if we come up with it, probably not good. So anthropomorphism is a very big thing in this because you're going to see that everything the gods do is all going to be like humans. Trust me, you'll be a little shocked today when some of the things you'll find out that the gods were capable of in their minds. So here's some mythology. Tablet of Shamash. Shamash is the stone thing there. He's the god of the sun. So the god of Shamash, and you can see how the sun is being held up by Shamash there, and people serving him. The Gilgamesh epic. This was also an epic which was about the flood. Yes, there were flood epics, not only for the Jewish. There are flood epics, which means the flood most likely happened because why would a bunch of different people come up with it in different areas? Unless it was probably true. Some of the gods are Marduk. Notice he has wings. Asher. Notice he has a bird head and wings. But again, look at him. Arms, legs, body, standing straight up, anthropomorphism. Everything is about people. And even Enlil, Enki, Utu, Sin. Yes, there was a god named Sin. Actually, Abraham's family most likely served the god Sin, which was a Sumer god that actually in Haran they actually had a big outpost for that god. Now, El is the major Canaanite deity, but it's interesting about El because El basically means Lord. So this is interesting. So when Abraham went out and he met Melchizedek, remember him? We talked about him in the last class. Melchizedek went up to him and said, "Hey, El Elyon, the Lord Most High." Notice he didn't call him a name other than Lord. So most likely, El was actually God way before. But as time went on, El kind of got replaced by Baal, Ashtoreth, all those other guys. So a lot of the people think that El really was God. Now, granted, they still tried to make an image of him. But remember, when Abraham went out and Melchizedek said, El Elyon, the Lord Most High, Abraham said, sounds good to me, you're right. And Abraham knew him because Abraham knew God. So most likely, they knew God. And that's actually interesting because in Romans 1, verse 21, it says, although they knew God, they neither blank, blank, blank. So which means they did know him. So El must not, I'm not trying to make something more out of this, but the thing is, this is probably God. They probably served God because they didn't name him. So anyway, but unfortunately what ended up happening is El got replaced by everybody else. All right, so Elyon, Most High God, El Shaddai. Now notice that these are actually Hebrew words. So they use the same El in them. El Shaddai, Elyon. Okay? Because the language is very similar from the old Arabic languages and other languages are very similar, we're going to find that we use the same words. Now again, I'm not saying this guy is anything good at all. This is still bad because you made an image of him. Even if it was God in the beginning, this turned into bad because we made an image and we tried to make him more like us. See the problem? See the corruption in all of that? Everything we do, we make into something about us. It's kind of yucky. So whatever might have good in the beginning, it turned out bad. So I highly recommend you reading the first chapter of Romans a few times after this class, because you're going to see that everything became corrupted because we're the ones who did it. All right, we'll examine Canaanite deities later, but that brings you to this. If you want to know about Canaanite deities, your homework, I made a big thing about Canaanite deities. These are the big guys you're going to see in the Bible. Again, the more you learn from this class, the more you're going to understand the Old Testament. Because I specifically are using very specific things utilized and seen in the Old Testament, which will help you to understand it. So all the list of Canaanite gods, it's good to know this because you're going to see these guys in the Bible. All right. The gods and beliefs. Now notice I put God as a subscript. Sadly, when you're in PowerPoint, you cannot put a lowercase on titles. It just won't let you do it. So I put it as subscript. There is no such word as religion in the ancient Near East. There's no such thing as religion. There is no such thing, likewise, there's no dichotomy, which is duality between the sacred and the secular. What that means is everything was religious back then. See, we call it religious because you may not believe in there's a God. So I'm religious, you're not. I believe in God, you don't. That's what we think today. Back then, everybody believed in gods. So everything was religious. Everything was something that came from a God. We can't say this. You don't walk up to someone and say, I'm an evolutionist back then. No, they'd think you would be an idiot because to them, everything was about the gods. There's even between the natural and the supernatural, everything was meshed because they believed everything came from the gods. Now, but that's interesting because even from our perspective as Christians of Yahweh, everything came from him. If you read the first couple chapters of Genesis, it all came from him. He created it. He put it into place. He put everything and made everything. So in a sense, they were more, in my opinion, the people back then were kind of more in line to reality than we are today, thinking that man makes everything and everything just kind of came out of happenstance. Oh, we had some sludge and things started walking out of the sludge. Evolution. I mean, it's crazy. But back then, they'd think you an idiot for thinking that kind of stuff. See, the Enuma Elish, Babylon creation myth. This is part of it. When the skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, Aspu, the first one, their begetter and their maker, Timat, who bore them all, had mixed in waters together, but had not formed pastures, discovered reed beds, when yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed. The gods were born within them, Lamu and Lamu emerged, their names pronounced. I know this is crazy, but we're going to go through this a little bit later because the way they name gods, how gods came about, is all going to be talked about today. How the ideas of this stuff. And I know it seems nuts, but it's part of the Bible. And again, we want to understand the way how God thinks, and you want to understand why he says what he does in the Old Testament. It's all because of this stuff. The idea of theogony. Theogony is basically the idea of a pantheon of gods, a super thing of multiple gods. There was not one God, but many. And the number of gods increased as each century passed. Again, you can even go back to Alex, and in the beginning, there was most likely in the very, 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 very beginning with God, there was one God. But as time went on, hearts became darkened. If you go through Romans, you start seeing all these bad decisions people make. They turned away from the true God and made their own. See, that's really the idea. There are as many as 2,000 gods in early Babylon and her mythology. 2,000. Now, if you ever want to see something, want to read something about that, Augustine's book, City of God, which, by the way, that man right there read in French. What a good guy. What a smart guy. He read it in French. Actually, I heard the French version is much better. Anyway, Augustine goes into that and talks about how crazy the Romans got with all their gods. That they had a god of the upper sea, the middle sea, the lower sea, god of the doorposts, they took gods for everything. It became nuts. The divine assembly. People in the ancient world found their own identity in their community. Since they tended to think of the gods as being similar to them, polymorphism, tended to think the gods being similar to them in many ways, they believed that the gods also found their identity in the community. It's all about what they thought. So the gods wanted to come down and be in community with the people, and the people wanted the gods to be in community with them. The pantheon. Now, I'm using this particular word specifically, and the reason is pantheon, we see this in Greek and Roman. The Greek and Romans had pantheons. They had their list of gods, but every single group of people had a list of gods. There were multiple gods for everything. There were state gods, there were separate gods, there were personal gods, there were all kinds of gods. But the idea comes from pan meaning all, theos meaning God, so all the gods. Now remember, in Acts when Paul comes across the temple to the unknown God, part of the pantheon. We don't know who you are, God, and I believe it's going to be next week, we're going to read about a prayer to the unknown God just to make sure you don't get that God mad at you. Seriously. I threw this in here even though this has nothing to do with the Bible. I wanted to show how anthropomorphism works. Look at all the Norse gods. The reason why I threw this because everybody watches movies like Thor or those movies. It's all because, and granted, by the way, Thor is a god. But he's human and has problems and everything else. Interesting. Individual and attributes. Anu was the prince of the god, but so was sin. The word of each god was preponderant, that this is of great importance, meaning the word that describes them, it shows how wonderful they are, and was to be taken above those of other gods. That's a direct quote from about 2000 BC. The name of the gods are very, very important because when they get named, they become real. Nearly any attribute that is applied to Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible can be documented with one god or another in the ancient Near East. Well, we shouldn't be surprised about that because God wanted to be personal with us. But the problem is because people get crazy, as Romans chapter 1 says, and kind of goes their own way, they kind of do the same things and want to become personal with the other gods. It all become corrupted. That's why I put corruption, because if you can see the reality here, what's going on is people slowly became corrupted and kind of went and destroyed everything. Gods in conflict. Although the God and a community clearly vie with one another for power, they would fight. Gods would fight with one another. That's not good. The conflict between the gods emerges at yet another level when they are seen representing various regions. My God's going to take over your God. My God's going to kill your God, and don't worry about it. That's a big thing in the Old Testament. Because what they do is they believe their God's going to support them. And their God's going to take care of them. What you're going to see, though, is when the people truly trusted in Yahweh, he wipes them all out. I mean, God takes care of it in a second. But this is a big thing. And you're going to see, because that's what they're going to be. They will taunt the Israelites with this kind of talk. They will taunt the Israelites. This is a big thing. Remember, this is good to understand this. In this context, the strengths and weaknesses of the deity emerge as their clients succeed or fail. If you fail, your God has failed you. But we'll learn later next week, maybe you just made the God mad and they just didn't want to help you. Ooh, that's not good. I mean, trust me, it gets crazy. But the key is understand. Remember, I'm only giving you this information to help you understand when you read the Old Testament and it seems really, really weird what they're saying it for a reason. So when they dealt with Babylon, or they dealt with Assyria, or they dealt with anybody else, the reason why these guys would taunt them, your God's going down, man. My God's going to take care of your God. My God will beat your God up. I mean, that really is what it was. The pantheon of Mesopotamian gods. Now, Mesopotamia, guys, we're going to go into this in 2 weeks when we get to the geography and history portion of this class. That the Mesopotamia basically means between two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. These are just some of the gods I just kind of threw in there to help you see. Now, none of these gods, for the most part, are you really going to see in the Bible. That's why I gave you the list of Canaanite gods. These are the ones you're going to see in the Bible. Okay? I also put in not just Canaanite gods, but I also put in Marduk, Asher, those ones, because those are the guys you're going to see. But these are ones that kind of came about in Mesopotamia. All right. Fallible. The gods make mistakes. Misjudgments. The gods commit crimes. Boy, I want to trust in that God. You don't know. Well, I don't think you think he'll be okay today? Maybe he'll be mad today. I shouldn't. Seriously, we got to remember, every human attribute becomes a god. Gods can be surprised, so it is clear that they are not considered omnipotent, meaning they don't know it all. And by the way, again, your homework this week, and I'm going to tell you, please do the homework, but especially the ones that says the apology. I specifically was put together, and I put the verses in all of this to help you to understand that God is not like any of this. When you go through this will become clear because God's going to say, that ain't how I am. I'm not like that. They do not possess complete knowledge. They experience uncertainty and confusion at times, and they make ill-advised decisions. You can't really trust them. Why do you think God continued throughout the Old Testament says, trust me, trust me, trust me, trust me, trust me? Because they couldn't trust the other gods. Our God says, I'm not a man that I should lie. Why do you think he said that? He's dealing with polytheism. God says, would I say something and not do it? No, he wouldn't. Why do you think Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, 1 Kings 18:27, at noon Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he says. Surely as he is a god, perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened. Didn't you ever read that and think, he was just making fun of them? No! He wasn't making fun of the prophets. He was making fun of the gods, because the gods were nuts. They went on vacation. Gods could be killed and raised again. They could go off and do crimes and do bad things. And notice how the prophets of Baal, they would cut themselves and do all these things, thinking that their God would take care of it. Well, so when Elijah was taunting them, he was not taunting them, he was taunting their gods. And that's tantamount to that's much worse. Because my God can beat up your God. Kind of like my dad can beat up your dad. My God can beat up your dad. I mean, seriously, that's really what it was. And God did this all the time. God, most of the time in the prophets, when something really, really crazy when God did something really, really big or whatever, he had a major reason to do it, and it always had to do with showing that he is the only God. These other gods are nothing. The Baal cycle. This is the key with this. In the Baal cycle, Baal is the god, one of the major Canaanite deities. Baal does not, the Baal cycle, basically, Baal goes away and returns each year. He didn't die, but he was defeated by the god of death. So why is it not raining this time of the year? Oh, because Baal was just defeated. Now, let me tell you something, guys. I don't want to serve a defeated God. I don't want to serve God that's going to say, oh yeah, I'm not going to be this. No. Again, this whole entire homework is going to help you to see that God can't be defeated. There is nothing that we can do anything to him. So what happens is his sister has to come and get him, save him. Sister comes in, restoring Baal's power, and all of a sudden, it starts raining again. Guess every year. That's what they thought. Remember I said about Hollywood? Why it's kind of like Hollywood is craziness? But that's what they thought. They're like, well, because it's not raining, Baal must have been defeated. Man, so that's why God says in the Psalms, you are strong and powerful. You cannot be defeated. We need to remember that people are trying to understand why it rains. That's really what it is. Remember, that's where the science comes in. Why does it rain? Why does it stop raining? Why are there seasons? But what God wanted to say is, open up your mouth and I will fill it. I own everything. I make it rain or I make it stop raining. Elijah announces a great drought. Remember this? If you guys ever read 1 Kings, Elijah Tishbite said to Ahab, the king Ahab from Israel, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain for the next few years. Ouch! If you know anything about Ahab, he was a major Baal worshiper. And his yucky wife Jezebel was even more of a Baal worshiper. But what God did was basically defeat him by saying, all right, it's not going to rain, so whatever you do to your God, he's not going to be able to do anything. Baal didn't do anything. Think about it. Baal did nothing. For 3 years, it didn't rain. So Baal was basically cut off at the legs. Now, granted, we know Baal doesn't exist, blah, 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 and I understand that. But what I'm saying is, this is why God did this kind of stuff in the Bible. to show the people the God you're following is not going to do you any good. It's kind of the same thing with us. Why are you have to work every single Sunday, extra work every Sunday, when God says, hey, can you come to me and look to me and seek me and I'll take care of everything? Ouch. It's true. Why are you struggling and working and do all these things to try to work and make all this extra money when God says, look to me? He says the same thing to us. Because God wants us to trust him. And what God did here was basically showed the people, Baal's not going to help you. If it was over 3 years it didn't rain. That's bad. Over 3 years. But God was not being mean. He was trying to show the people, what are you looking to Baal for? He ain't helping you. Where is he at now? You can call him all you want. I mean, that was really the whole idea of that. That came about at the end of the drought. The end of the drought happened. Elijah says, all right, we're going to go down. We're going to have a showdown. And Baal was defeated in that time. It was. What do the people say? We saw what God did. Fire rained down from heaven. Bam. Baal did nothing. So what God does, so the key, what he's doing is he's proving himself to the people. You can trust him. The good news is God's the same today as he was then. God did this to show that Baal was ineffectual and feeble compared to Yahweh. Baal can do nothing. He did that on purpose to show the people. I think it was a good object lesson. Because guess what? We remember what happened in the story? Elijah says, okay, all right, it's time now. He goes and prays, bam, fire, rains. It's not Elijah. Elijah's not the great thing. Elijah's just doing what God told him to do. He was a prophet. So that's pretty awesome. This was science in the ancient Near East. Every aspect of what we call the natural world was associated with some deity in the ancient Near East. The result of that term is natural world, which would be meaningless and nonsensical to them. There's nothing natural. Everything is supernatural to them. So when science castigates the Genesis story, how God taught creation, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Guys, have you ever think about why God specifically said that? Because to the people back then, it describes everything. God doesn't have to go into quantum physics. He doesn't have to go into calculus. He doesn't have to go into whatever science you think. God doesn't have to do that. Because you know what? The average person back then, when God said, I created the heavens and earth, he's like, okay, no problem. I believe it. God didn't have to do it. Science today goes, yeah, God doesn't go and tell us why he did it and all this other stuff. Why did he have to do that? Back to these people back then, if they said it, that's good enough for them. The nice thing is it should be good enough for us too. If God says it, we know what to do it. Because God will prove himself. That is a key thing about God you'll find in the Old Testament. God proves himself over and over and over to them. God makes himself well known to the people, proves himself, always comes through with what he promises. He never fails. He doesn't commit crimes. He doesn't go sleep or go slumber. Okay? So what is it in Psalm 127? God never slumbers nor sleeps. We must remember that science describes what God did in creation. That's all science does. He did not need to use science. It is our way of explaining things. People wonder, why didn't God do that? Because he didn't need to. In the beginning, God spoke, and it happened. He didn't need to use science. See, this is God. So think about what God, and even today with evolution, these guys are come up, these scientists are like, yeah, we're so cool. Yeah, we can think about all this stuff. They can't do anything. Do you know one thing science can't do? They can't recreate creation. Absolutely cannot be done. That's their biggest frustration. The idol, the temple, and the state religion. So the idol is part of the idea of religion back then. The idol becomes very, very important along with the temples. We're going to talk about the temples next week, but the idols are very important. The idols were transformed into gods through a special process. Ptah made their bodies according to their wishes. Thus the gods entered into the bodies of every wood, every stone, every clay, everything that grows upon them, in which they came to be. Idols became the gods. So now the gods themselves are not the idols. The gods themselves just inhabit them. That's why whenever you see in the Bible that they're dealing with idols, they're very protective of their idols. Think about it. A phenomenon referred to as habitation, this way the image was not a physical picture of the deity, but a characterization of divine nature, meaning that they would actually take on the attributes of the idol. So the person would create the idol, and supposedly they would go through all this process, and the god would come and stay in the idol. Well, a little mouthwash makes every god happy. They would wash the mouth out. The mouth of the idol it was a special mouth-washing process. I know it's nuts. But the thing is, Marduk's favorite. By the way, Marduk is the Babylonian deity, major Babylonian deity. Naming, mouthwashing, and temple ceremony. This is where the god would come and occupy the idol. Since the god takes up residence in the idol and the temple, if it were captured by enemies, the god would go with the captured. The god would go with them, leaving the people desolate. So what they used to do is when you defeat your enemies, the number one thing you're going to go in and do is steal their idols. Because now their gods go with them. This is how, and it's no wonder that God in Isaiah talks about how stupid this whole thing is. Because the gods would go with them. They thought that's it. It was done. Well, we're done for. Idols are gone. Because they believed that God inhabited the idols. The idols would be offered food. They'd be offered drink. They would be dressed. They would have music played for them. The idea is make them happy. We would be happy to be dressed, right? So, of course, they must want that too. See the anthropomorphism in that? We thought we would like that, so I guess the gods would want that too, right? But God says, don't make an image of me, because he doesn't need to be dressed. God says, don't make an image of me, because I don't need to be fed. He said, in Psalms it says, if I were hungry, God says, I'm not going to tell you. Why? Why should I? Because I own everything. Again, that's what this is going to really help you with that. Okay, all who make idols are nothing. The things they treasure are worthless. Those who speak up for them are blind. They are ignorant to their shame. Who shapes a god and casts an idol, which can profit nothing? Now, God was basically saying this, and this is a classic theme in the prophets, saying these idols are stupid. They mean nothing. Because you know what? If Israel is defeated, God still goes with them, or stays with the ones here, because He's omnipresent. You can't take God away, because the idea, if you can take the idol and the idol now has to go with you, that idol is weak. God is not weak. God can do anything. You can't take God away. David says, wherever I go, you are there. If I go up in the air and the sea, anywhere I go, God, you're still there. Because the thing is, they believed that the gods would only inhabit that idol. The gods are right here. Right there. Here's the idol, there's the God. Take away the idol, God goes with them. I wouldn't want to serve a God like that. That's nuts. So the thing is, guys, this week, understand that the idols were something that gods came into. They had elaborate ceremonies. But again, remember, everything is anthropomorphism. Created things. No, and I'm going to tell you, that's the reason why God said so many things about himself. Because he is not created, he is the creator. So this actually, homework, this is the Apology of Astridides, the philosopher. What this was is this is the very first Christian apology to a Roman emperor. It was written because he was trying to explain to the emperor who God is. And to me, it's the most phenomenal way of describing God because, and that's why I'll put a bunch of verses and stuff in there, because what I did is I put in the verses to show who God is. Because after learning what you just did today, you'll read this and you'll say, yeah, God's way different. God doesn't lie. He doesn't change. He doesn't need to be fed. He doesn't occupy an idol. He's not fallible. So that's the reason why this is. So please do the homework because this will really help you. Also, this is original. This is actually, it says Old Testament history. All of this information comes from the homework prior to the class. So if you haven't done this also, please do it. Let me tell you, we have 80 and 90-year-old ladies who are doing this homework every time. So if they can do it, you can do it. Any questions? Any questions about this information? Okay, next week we're going to go over polytheism number 2, and we're going to go into some really crazy stuff. So as if this really wasn't crazy enough. So, all right, thanks, guys.